Hi Devnil, welcome back. It's been a while since we did the last video, which was almost about 3 to 4 weeks back. And in this dynamically changing situation, as the world is coming out of the COVID and economies and cities are now opening up from their lockdowns, the whole world is looking towards the US Main Street and the Wall Street. From that perspective, we would like to have your views on how the US and China, which is the biggest producer, the two main producers and the consumers in the world, are impacting the world as we move forward. Why do you think that innovation always accelerates in the time of a crisis such as now in COVID?
Because in a crisis, we are all damn scared. The employees are scared of losing their jobs. The employers, the businesses, they are not sure whether they will have a business down the road. And the boardrooms are scared of losing market share, falling in a value trap, and even getting into hostile takeovers. And that's where whoever is agile, who is nimble, can quickly adapt to the new world order.
So Devnil, why do you think that the tech sector is holding out so strong? Except with the exception of certain old tech like say IBM or HP, new age tech is almost at a lifetime high or a 52-week high, whereas classical sectors like real estate or oil and gas or even the high street banking sectors, travel, tourism, leisure, they're all being beaten down to the bare bones. What's your take on that?
Technology is the bedrock of innovation. Is the harbinger for doing things faster, better and cheaper. In times of crisis, enabled by technology, new products and service offerings comes into the marketplace. That solves the very big problem that is staring on our face.
What do you think are the key disruptive innovations that are going to gain significant momentum around this COVID situation, which are going to steal the thunder from established brands?
The way we see things from here on, we see essentially 3 or 4 main disruptive technological innovations that is going to really take the wind off the sail of established players. The first one is basically the robotics and artificial intelligence. The second is energy storage, and the third will be gene therapies. If you add a fourth one to that, it will be essentially, it could be a blockchain-led disruption of the fintech space through digital wallets and cryptos. So if you look at innovations in terms of robotics and in terms of artificial intelligence, we will now see a lot of protectionism playing out, and we will see a lot of supply chain is getting recreated and realigned, not so much on offshore but near shore as well as onshore. But then in onshore and all, we do not have the skills. So robots and artificial intelligence will actually play a significant role in making things happen. In this space, especially if you look at the recent gigafactory of Tesla that came out in China, where the productions are happening when US Fremont factory is closed. 15 months time from ground zero, the factory has been put in place. Much of that factory is mechanical without human touch, and probably the highest amount of mechanization that you can see in any automobile factory anywhere in the world. So these are the things that will enable people to move near shore or onshore. For example, look, Apple's phone. We can't have skills overnight in America to make those phones. But if there is a very high level of automation as well as through robots and artificial intelligence, is the machines who could produce these near shore or onshore. So that's where a very big disruption is going to happen. Then when we come to energy and storage, the main play, if you see, the batteries are actually disrupting the whole oil and gas world. And we don't expect to see any time the $60 oil anymore. Instead, probably what we will see is somewhere in a median of about $30, and won't be surprised if over time these barrel prices goes down to 20 and even below, to even single digits sooner than later. That's a huge disruption. That's a whole set of sectors that are coming down. So it's going to be very big disruption, a very big transition that will happen from oil economies and oil exporters. At the same time, you look at this way, the lower oil prices will enable the oil importing economies in a very big way. And especially that will be one of the reasons, despite all these QEs that is being done, 3 trillion and already counting, we probably will not see inflation in the near term because the oil being a very important input cost will continue to remain quite benign and muted over a fairly long period of time. So importing economies like India and all should get significantly benefited from this transition that's going to happen. Then comes areas like cryptos, blockchains. A huge amount of QE is being provided. 3 trillion in the last count, and it's still continuing. More are on the plan, and this is just American Fed. Now, with so much of a liquidity flowing into the system, ideally it should lead into a significant amount of inflation, maybe hyperinflation. Second problem is, how do you make sure that this money, liquidity, flows into the hands of the people who need it most? If you look at M1, the money supply, the amount of money that has been thrown into the system in the 6 weeks actually exceeds the money that was thrown into the system in the entire global financial crisis of 2008. But with so much of a liquidity coming in, then there are outliers like PayPal through its Venmo, Square through its Cash App, then players like Intuit. They have a far better understanding of smaller businesses' balance sheet, and they are able to lend money. Recently in the Square conference call, if you see, the management gave us an outline that they have been distributing larger sums of money, a significantly large sum of money, to the bottom of the pyramid in the American economy, with an average loan book size of $12,000. Now, if you compare that with JP Morgan Chase's or maybe Wells Fargo's or Bank of America's loan book, the minimum ticket size will be 120,000, and there they do not even have any standard operating procedure to evaluate and give loans to these businesses that needs the most, who can support the employment the most, who can create the velocity within the economy the most. And this is where there is a value migration happening from the established banking players to these outliers who will get a significant traction now through their digital wallets. And in this, what will happen is that there will be customers who will permanently be lost from the banks and into these outlier operators like PayPal and Squares and Intuit. This is a significant transition again for the economy, and this will never come back. And that something will only accelerate as we go along, because these service providers will also not stay there. They will keep on adding newer and newer services. They will keep on getting more and more wallet share of these small businesses that are in a very different scale, who cannot be addressed by the Main Street banks. For a Main Street bank loan, maybe these businesses have to wait for 7 days. Yet at the end of 7 days, they probably will get a denial. On the other hand, with PayPals and Squares of the world, they will probably get their loans in 7 hours, because PayPal and Squares, they already have an idea of how much these businesses are receiving every day and how much they are spending every day, and hence it's very easy for them to give them a facility to tide over this crisis. So these are like very significant changes that is going to happen into the economy, and this will be like permanent changes. And this is where we will see the Main Street banking arena will completely transition from here, leaving one or two very quality balance sheet with a very quality leadership staying out there, staying put there, but most of the other banks will actually go to the margin. Exactly what is happening through batteries, EVs and robots to the automobile industry. Most of the automobile players today will actually be going back into their castle, closing out their moats, focusing back into their traditional businesses and trying to make them survive. Therefore, all their initiatives towards EV, etc. will all fall off the cliff and get slowed down. This is the time when people are now going to buy more cars because they are not trusting sharing the shared economy. They are not trusting traveling in public transports, and therefore more and more people, the airlines are not available for them to fly from one city to another. So therefore they will drive between cities rather than fly. And that's where the need for the car, the demand for the cars and vehicles will come up, and this leaves EV players like Tesla with a very clear head start, which they can now capitalize on, because they have nowhere else to put their allocation. They will be putting more and more allocation into their EV plants, and that's where, and in production of electric vehicles, and that's where they will literally take off from here, while the Main Street automobile industry will actually suffer an irreparable loss, which probably they will not be able to overcome anytime soon. And then comes a very important, probably the last segment is basically gene sequencing. If you really look at it, this time we did significantly better than what we did during SARS in terms of finding the strain of this virus and get to the test kits. How did you get those test kits? The test kits were possible because we could sequence these genes very quickly, and that could happen because today, due to technological advancement, since SARS in 2004 and so on, we are in a much better position to actually read the genes and then write the genes and then sequence them. And that's where in matter of days we have been able to produce the testing kits, which otherwise we would have been in a very bad situation without the kits. The problem is that we couldn't distribute the kit in time. The same way now, if we extrapolate the whole thing, we are now heading into a scenario where instead of doing an annual medical checkup where blood tests are conducted, we will now be doing a sequencing on our gene. And then we will try to see where and how it is mutating, since we did it last year during the annual checkup. And in the process, we will be able to find out within the gene what are the things that are having now short circuit or something wrongly getting wired in its circuit. And that's where we will be able to get third stage, fourth stage disease, which otherwise manifests, other than being in a third or a fourth stage, we will be able to get them very, very early in the day, like pancreatic cancer. Normally it is only manifests at the fourth stage. We can't even get it because we are looking at wrong parameters. If you look at gene sequencing, we will probably be able to get them much early. And from here, we can also do very targeted medication to treat these kind of terminal illnesses.
Why do you think Wall Street analysts miss disruptive innovations by miles? They looked at disbelief when Apple or Amazon or even now Tesla happened. And this continues to be the phenomena. What's your take on that?
It's actually a very good question. Wall Street analysts get it all wrong and miss it by miles is because they are extremely value oriented, and that's why they cannot figure out the growth stories. What I mean by that is essentially, what are they trying to do? They are basically trying to extrapolate a trend. They are trying to do trend analysis. But when you are really looking at disruption and disruptions that are led by innovative use of technology, there is no trend. It's your imagination and in your belief in the team that is implementing that disruption. in their ability to actually pull things out of the woods. So that's a very different game plan. You have to actually look more at what is being done every day rather than what has happened in the past. The Wall Street analysts also get it very, very wrong because the whole analyst world is actually verticalized. They are all within silos. So there is an analyst who is only talking about automobile. He's an automobile analyst. But if you really, really look at it, they don't get Tesla because Tesla is not an automobile company only. Then what is it? It is a robotics company. It's an AI company. It's an electric vehicle company. It's a battery company. It's again a company which has got big data. Just imagine 700,000 Tesla cars that are going around the world, being driven by you, me. Every night they are sending data back, the driving data back to Tesla. And that's where Tesla is mining them to fine tune its autonomous driving algorithms. That's where they are looking for making their own chip for autonomous driving. Now if you tell an Wall Street analyst, they will just give it a thumbs drive, saying that why an automobile company is getting into a space of NVIDIA, of designing a chip, and getting in the space of maybe Taiwan Semiconductor to make a chip. But if you really, really look back and wind the clock, in 2007, before iPhone was launched, Apple precisely did this. Those days, the phone chips were all made by the chip makers. And that's where all used by Nokias and Ericssons and Motorola's of the world, Blackberries. But when it came to Apple, Apple decided to make its own chip because they found that if they have to disrupt the status quo of the existing industry, it has to be through chip. And that chip cannot be the same chip that everyone else, the industry leaders, the stalwarts are using. So Apple went in for chip making. The analyst community gave as many thumbs down as they can, bad mouthed as much as they could, but then everything else is history. Today, Nokia, Blackberries, Ericssons are not there. And it's just a déjà vu. The same thing is now happening with Tesla. Again, they are getting it wrong. So that's the basic. And that is why if you see how we approach the whole process, we don't put our analysts on a vertical scale. And this is something you are very much privy to. Our analysts are actually on an horizontal scale. They are rather looking for technology and what technology can do in their bottom-up analysis rather than trying to extrapolate the trend. That's a very different play that we play in this ball game. Our playbook is very different. Our analysts are in a very different playbook than the Wall Street analysts, and that's why they never get it. The moment they see 100 PE, they fall from the cliff, from the chairs. They say, oh, okay, discard. But 100 PE is for a reason. Rather, G's 5 PE is actually a value trap. G will progressively remain there and probably never ever will be able to come back since the days of Jack Welch. And it's time, therefore, to move on to something else. Even in these times when you see that technology has literally led a march, stands out in the rubble that has been put across by coronavirus, across oil and gas, across banking, across real estate, across transportation, leisure, tourism. How come technology stood out like that? And within that, if you really, really see, the old technology hasn't stood out. HPs and IBMs didn't do well. Cisco's didn't do well. It's the new technologies that they are either at their lifetime high, like Amazon. Again, another place where Wall Street missed it by miles for several years. The Wall Street analysts who 10 years back said Amazon will belly up, today are the biggest bulls on Amazon. But 10 years has passed in the process. And that is why if you look at disruptive technology and invest in disruptive technology, it's so much of a game-changing wealth creator than any other sector.